Welcome to Chomping on the Bit by Raging Semi. Reviews 3. Table of contents. Report this. Print. EPUB. Text size. Plus or minus. Chomping on the Bit. Twilight was cleaning up the loft. Normally, Spike would have done the chores, but she wanted to do them herself today. It was, after all, Dragon Assistant Appreciation Day. It had said so right on the calendar. It's not that she didn't appreciate Spike every day of the year without a calendar to tell her to do so, but she felt like the calendar gave her a good excuse to really appreciate him with some gusto. So that's why she was cleaning up the place. Twilight got to Spike's little basket at the foot of her bed. She hadn't had to clean up after him since he was just a little baby. She pulled his blanket to throw it in the hamper for washing. A small book fell out. Twilight didn't recognize it, and she could at least recognize most of the books in her library. It must be his bedtime reading material, she thought to herself. She reflexively opened it and started flipping through. It was Spike's diary. She could tell that almost right away. Part of her wanted to stop reading immediately. In fact, she could almost hear Pinkie Pie's voice telling her to stop right now or she'd lose Spike forever. But she couldn't stop. Part of the reason was her natural curiosity. Another part was her habit of finishing every book she started. There were naughty things in Spike's diary. Fantasies. That didn't surprise her, and she certainly didn't think less of Spike for it. She had some pretty embarrassing stuff in her own diary, so she was no pony to judge. A lot of it was about Rarity. That didn't surprise Twilight either. Obviously, the little player had a hard-on for Rarity since the day they met. But there were other ponies in there, too. Fluttershy, Pinkie Pie, Apple Bloom, Cheerily. And then Twilight started to read about herself. She had to sit down on her bed. The shock was so intense. She had just made her own bed. The star and moon print bed spread was still warm out of the dryer. In all her time and all of her studies of friendship, Twilight had never even considered Spike's feelings before. She felt a little ashamed of herself for not seeing what was right in front of her. This happened with alarming regularity. It's not like Twilight was a mother figure to Spike. She wasn't even all that much older, as she had been a little filly herself when she hatched him. She felt more like he was a little brother, although she realized Spike had no reason to feel the same way. She was a bit older than him, something like an authority figure to him, but much closer to a friend. They lived under the same roof and slept in the same room. They had been there for each other, and taken care of each other. They had been through adventure together, fighting off the Diamond Dogs, for instance. It was no wonder that Spike had feelings for her. Twilight unconsciously laid backwards on her bed, holding his diary above her. She read about things that Spike wanted to do to her, and why. Twilight had no idea that he had such imagination. Or for that matter, that he was such a romantic at heart. Twilight slowly started to slide her front hoof down her body, and it ended up between her hind legs. There was probably more objective material in here about her than there was about Rarity. You know, it's weird. I was reading about Trixie when she was masturbating. Clopping. And I found it really attractive. Yet and it's the same thing with Twilight here, but when I see a female in real life masturbate, it's not really my thing. This is odd. Spike did write that he thought Rarity was prettier than Twilight. Twilight didn't mind him writing that. She had to agree to it herself. She didn't think much of her own looks, but reading the diary, it seemed like Spike cared a lot more for Twilight and always had. He never brought it up because they were so close. He thought she would automatically spurn him and ruin the solid relationship that they already had. Twilight used her magic to levitate the book above her. She lowered her other hoof between her legs and rubbed harder and deeper. She shut her eyes, only opening them occasionally to read another sentence or two. She wished she had known sooner. Spike got home from Whitley Pulp's stationery store. He had a bag full of nice new scrolls and inks and pens. He was very proud of himself. Twilight had given him the morning off. He didn't know why, and he didn't care to ask. He was just thankful to have such a lucky day. Spike stopped in his tracks. Twilight was standing right in front of him at the library's lobby, having a funny-looking smile on her face. "What did I do?" he asked, feeling his luck fade away. Nothing, she said. Well, then, what did you do? He asked. Is it a big mess? No, nothing's wrong. Then why are you looking at me like that? It's Dragon Assistant Appreciation Day. Dragon what? Assistant Appreciation Day. There's a day for that? Spike, Twilight said, I know how hard you work to help me out, and I'm really grateful for it, even if I don't always show it. I hardly ever show it. So I wanted to make it up to you. Spike, I appreciate you. You're very good to me, so whatever it is that you want to do today, your wish is my command. Really? Uh-huh. Anything? Absolutely. Can I... He paused. Yes? Asked Twilight. Can I have the rest of the afternoon off too? Sure. Oh, wow, breathed Spike. This really is my lucky day. Spike? I still get my full allowance, right? Of course. Whew. Spike, all of the things in the world you could possibly want to do, and with me, just taking the day off is it? No, she's... Well, I mean, you get, if you want something done, you gotta do it yourself, I guess. Well, we could go fishing. Spike, she started getting frustrated. You could help me find some jewels. I'm pretty hungry. Spike! Go out for lunch. Spike! Maybe catch a movie? Spike, I read your diary! She didn't mean to say it quite so loud, or at all. Spike's jaw slowly dropped open. He turned beet red at the same time. How dare you! I can't believe you! You're horrible! How could you? He tried to scream all at once. Spike, how could you betray me just like that? Oh God, this is so embarrassing. I can't even look you in the eye. Spike, I want to do what you wrote in the book. She screamed again before she could go any further. Spike's jaw nearly dislocated when he couldn't drop any further. I mean, I can just imagine that, like... he's all, like, in shock already, and the rest of his jaw just, like, dislodges itself, and he's like, he can't reattach it. He's, like, trying to reattach... Oh, God. Are you serious? Uh-huh. I mean, if you want to. It's your special day, after all. Even page 107? Especially page 107, if that's what you want. What about something I've always wanted to do but never wrote down? She was suddenly worried. His diary had already been pretty imaginative. She couldn't think of what on earth he hadn't already written down. Sure, she said anyway. Can we do some role-playing? He asked. Excuse me? Spike shut his eyes and concentrated on getting his words out. Can we do some role-playing? Twilight, can I ride you? Spike opened one eye. He was smiling at him. She was smiling at him. They started on Twilight's bed. She had a thing about him getting on her bed because of his shedding. A dragon? I'm gonna shed my scales. Like, I know snakes and lizards do that, but when they shed, it's not like fur. Like, when they shed, it's just a big coat. You can just get rid of it. Okay. But it was seasonal, so there was no problem now. Twilight's covers had long since cooled from the dryer, but they were still nice and soft. Not as soft as Twilight, Spike thought to himself. Spike was brushing Twilight. He had an assortment of brushes laid out on the bed. They were both comfortable and relaxed, laying in the sunshine as it streamed through the window. Twilight usually just used magic to brush herself in the morning. She never had any idea how sensuous it could feel. Spike started with her mane. Twilight rolled her head back and closed her eyes. Spike was very careful around her horn. He knew how sensitive it could be. Still, he occasionally rubbed the brush up against the base of it, as if to tease her. Spike switched brushes and went to work on her coat. He rubbed her down vigorously. It was almost like a massage. He started with the muscles on her neck and then slowly moved all the way down her back to the base of her tail. He brushed large circles around the curve of her hips. Done with her back, Twilight rolled over, belly up. Spike started again at her neck and worked down. He brushed her chest and then stroked up her front legs. He brushed her belly and was surprised at how good it could feel and how erotic. Spike stroked lower. She was completely exposed to him, but he didn't say a thing. He focused completely on brushing her coat. Spike stroked lower, and then down around her love, but without touching it. He brushed up her thighs and calves. Finally, Spike switched brushes again, and Twilight turned her back over so that he could brush her tail. He took a long time, making sure every hair was nice and straight. He kept brushing after he needed to. Long after he needed to. There was a part of him that didn't want to stop. He put the brush down, and he turned her head back to them. "Shall I get dressed?" she asked. "Uh-huh," he nodded. Okay. Twilight got up off the bed. She felt like a million bits. She walked over to the dresser, and Spike followed. "Which saddle would you like?" she asked as she pulled up the top drawer. Oh. Said Spike. "How about the blue one? The one with the fleece?" "Okay," she said. "Would you like to cinch it?" Could you squeeze into it?" Twilight got onto her hind legs and lifted the saddle high into the air. She pulled it down around her front legs and over her head. It got caught a bit around her shoulders, so Spike got behind her to help pull it further down. It was a tight fit. He had to get his little claws between the leather strap and her soft coat and pull. Finally, he got it squeezed down around her belly and made sure it was on straight. Twilight got down on all fours again, and Spike checked the stirrups. "How about a bridle?" Twilight asked. How about the decorative one? With all the sequins?" "You got it. Bit or no bit?" "Bit, please." "All right. At least to start out. I won't want it the whole time. Can you help me put this on?" Spike carefully lifted the rein over her shoulders. Twilight opened her mouth for him. Oh, yeah. He delicately placed the bit between her teeth, and she smiled to let him know that she was perfectly comfortable. She lowered her head, and he raised the crown piece up and over her horn behind her ears. He was as cautious as if he were crowning the princess herself. Once he had the bridle on, he cinched up all the straps. "How I look?" she asked. "Holy guacamole," he said. "I've never seen you look more beautiful before." "Ooh, eh? Am I ever?" The lobby of the library was a quiet place, even when it was open. It had been closed since Spike got home from the store, and Twilight had locked the door behind him. There was barely any noise except for the ticking of the clock and the chiming of the hour. Suddenly, the noise was broken by a cacophony. I don't know what that means. Iron-shod hooves banged down the staircase. Twilight leaped down the last several stairs and flew into the room. "Ha ha!" shouted Spike, mounted on her back. Oh my god. Ha ha! shouted Spike, mounted on her back. He had a large pot on his head. He waved around the yardstick as if it were a lance. He had his blanket around his neck as if it were a cape. Awesome! Twilight reared up on her hind legs and neighed furiously. She pawed at the air with her hooves. "Onward, faithful steed!" Spike shouted. "We must rescue the fair maiden Princess Twilight from the evil Dragon King!" This is great. Twilight neighed wildly again. Then she got down on all fours and stomped on the floor with her front hoof and snorted. She took off. Spike would have fallen off if not for her stirrups and reins. Twilight started to leap over each piece of furniture as if they were fences and she were in a jumping show. This time, Spike came out of the stirrups and could only hold on to the reins. Twilight stopped as she cleared the last obstacle. She waited for Spike to regain his balance, and then get his feet back into the stirrups. She started stepping sideways and backwards, which was a bit tricky for a pony as non-athletic as she was. Finally, she turned towards the cellar door. Spike raised his yardstick lance. "Hark!" he shouted. "A cave! Surely this is the Surely this is the lair of the evil Dragon King. Forward, my lovely steed. We must make haste before the villain can rob the fair damsel of her virtue." Twilight neighed and then charged at the door. "Excelsior!" Spike shouted as he went flying through. Oh my god. The commotion on the first floor of the library mostly died down, except for the loud noises from the basement. There were the noises of Spike shouting, Twilight neighing, and a large piece of Twilight's lab equipment tipped over and crashed onto the floor. There was a miscellany of crashes, bangs, squeaks, and other assorted noises. Finally, the clopping of Twilight's hose coming back up the stairs, presumably having defeated the Dragon King. Spike's impromptu helmet was missing. His lance was snapped in half. The pair did a victory lap around the library, Twilight trotting all the way. They then went back upstairs to their loft to enjoy the pleasure of their spoils. The piece of the first floor of the library returned. Twilight leaped gracefully over the footboard of her bed and landed square in the middle of her mattress. She looked back at Spike and looked down at her. Both blushed. Neither said anything. Their little game reached its natural and more serious conclusion. Twilight bucked her hind end up. Spike lost the stirrups again and held on to the rein. He landed on his belly on Twilight's back. She made smaller bucking movements. Each time, he moved a little further up her back. Each time she moved, her butt a little further into the air and her face a little closer to the pillow. Soon, she stopped. Her back legs were straight and her ass high in the air. Her ear was buried into the pillow. Spike was resting almost directly on top of her ass. He had his arms stretched out and the reins were pulled as far back as they could go. Oh, poor Twilight. Spike, be gentle. Twilight's fragile. Spike tried to assess his position. The middle of his body was comfortably resting right between Twilight's two cheeks. From the scale of his small body, Twilight's ass was very large and round. Her cheeks were muscular, especially while flexing in his position, but they were also still soft. Twilight pulled her tail out of the way. She was ready. Spike could feel it. Her wetness was all over his scales. She seemed to like dressing up even more than he did. Spike started to rub himself against her, humping her. His abdominal scales were rubbing up and down against her. I hate that word. Were rubbing down up against her. Yeah, I like the word love. Rubbing up and down against her love. He could feel her wetness spreading up and down his body. He started moving her ass up and down just a bit, shifting him up and down on her. He could feel she was getting impatient. Spike could feel it coming. The tip of his dick started to slide down from between two of his scales. He grabbed her coat with the reins still in his hands and positioned himself perfectly. He could feel his scales being shoved aside for his erection. The tip entered straight away into Twilight's love. She grunted in delight with the bit still in her mouth. Spike's rock hard... that would have sounded weird if I finished it like that. Spike's rock hard cock slid from his own body and into Twilight's. Then, Twilight set to work. She started poking him gently. He had no leverage to work with, but she had good control. Each time he bounced up, his dick came sliding out and then fell back in again. Spike relaxed his body except for his grip on the reins and enjoyed the fucking. Twilight carefully balanced him as she bucked him. Sometimes she would bend her knees. Sometimes she would pull on the reins. Eventually, she started to get the hang of it and started to buck harder. Sometimes he would come popping out of her, and she would chomp at the bit. Chomp at the bit. Chomping at the bit. And she would chomp at the bit until he could stick it back in. Once they both got a better feel for it, he too started to pull on the reins as he descended. She started flexing her ass cheeks as she caught more of him inside of her. Spike was living a dream. She felt so soft and wet, and so incredibly warm compared to his cold blood. The sensation was so intense. He couldn't control himself. He started to come already. He could feel it moving from deep inside of him, and then down through his shaft and out into Twilight. It was too fast. It was too good. He needed to settle down. Spike found it difficult to concentrate. Twilight was still bucking and harder than ever. He didn't think she had noticed him coming. He moved his tail down between his legs and up between Twilight's. He touched the end of it to Twilight's clit. She stopped bucking and screamed into her pillow. She hadn't been expecting it. Spike rubbed her off with the arrowhead-shaped portion of his tail. Twilight's ass cheeks occasionally spasmed, then flexed in uncontrolled delight. Spike could feel himself start to grow soft inside of her. He didn't have much time. He moved his tail up to the base of his cock, then pointing the tip down, he started to slide his tail into Twilight. She moaned underneath him and kept pushing it in. Each time the flexible fins of his tail folded under her clit, his tail jerked in a little more. He dropped the reins and let it fall around her head. He grabbed a hold of her ass. He had a better hold now that he was more dug in. Twilight remained motionless, except for the random involuntary quivering. She started pushing himself up and letting himself down, driving both his cock and his tail into her pussy at the same time. She was loving it. He had to dig his claws into her coat to keep from losing his balance when she started to heave her ass violently upwards. Spike's limp dick popped out. It's a nice image. He looked down at it. The little red shaft was slowly retreating back within its scales. It drew a little drop of wet cum right in the center of her asshole. Oh, nice. And then it was gone. Twilight started to scream into her pillow, the bit still in her mouth. Spike could tell she was about to come. His tail was sopping wet. He slid his tail all the way in and started flexing it so that it was as hard as a brick. Page 92, he thought to himself. Ha ha. He let go of his hands and remained firmly inside of her. Then she started to jackhammer. Her whole body shook. There was vibrations within vibrations. The whole frame of the bed started to shake. Twilight tried to scream again, but it came out with a stutter. Twilight fell over to her side. Spikes fell out onto the bed. Her face now out of the pillow, she opened her mouth wide and screamed despite the bit. All four of her legs kicked randomly and wildly as she came. Her legs slowed down as it slowly faded. When she slowly opened her eyes and assessed her situation, Spike was cuddling against her back, stroking her mane. They rested there for a long time in the afterglow. The afternoon sun slowly moved across the bed. Eventually, Twilight rolled over to face him. He removed the bed from her mouth. She looked down at the featureless scales of his belly. "Did you come?" she asked. He nodded. "So did I. I noticed." "Are you ready to go again?" she asked. "Are you serious? It's still your special day, isn't it?" It was only mid-afternoon. Just a minute." She placed the tip of her hoof on the bottom of his chin, right where his abdominal scales started. She started counting down each of his scales. 1, 2, 3. Spike didn't know what she was doing at first. Twilight was a good study of dragon anatomy. She got down to her desired scales, and she kissed him right between them. He moaned and grabbed her head by her ears. She very delicately wedged her tongue up between his scales. She could feel the tip of his dick on the tip of her tongue. Oh, so it like... Is that how it works? Is that how it works with lizards? I don't know. Is it like inside of... That's interesting. I didn't know that. She very delicately wedged her tongue up between his scales. She could feel the tip of his dick on the tip of her tongue. It started to slide out and into her eager mouth. Now, that would be... I mean, I'm not saying I've sucking penis before, but I mean, that would be a little interesting if you were just on that and then it just it emerged itself. That'd be a little interesting. Spike squeezed her ears as hard as she could without hurting her. She could taste herself on his cock. She rolled him over onto his back and started filleting him as fast as she could. It was easy to fit the whole thing into her mouth. She took the whole thing in and sucked as hard as she could. He screeched. How unpleasant. Then she slowly slid it out of her mouth, except for the head. She circled the hole at the tip with her tongue. "Turn around," he whispered. She looked up at him with her big purple eyes, still servicing him. "Turn around," he repeated. She popped his cock out of her mouth, got up, and turned around, straddling his head. "Your body's not long enough," she said. "I don't care," he said. "Come here." He grabbed her by her thighs and pulled her down to the top of his face. He eagerly licked up the dark purple lips of her pussy, and then down the middle. He tickled her clit and watched as her bright pink inner lips slowly got wider and flatter. He shoved his face up into her and jammed in his tongue. Troy couldn't do anything but let herself be pleased. She couldn't reach his cock to return the favor from this position. She had wanted to please him today, and instead he was paying more attention to her. As always. When she started to feel him flagging, she hopped off of him and rolled onto her back. "Oh," she said dramatically. "Poor innocent me." Spike sat up to see what she was up to. "Here I am, poor innocent virginal Princess Twilight at the hands of the evil Dragon King. Oh, what will he do to me? Oh, no, no, jeez." Spike grinned and started to crawl up her body. He unhooked her bridle, pulled it off of her, and threw it to the floor. "Oh!" she gasped. He uncinched her saddle and pulled it out from underneath her. "He's ravishing me! Help! Where is my hero?" She spread her legs wide for him. He got in between them and plunged his cock into her. "My virtue! I'm ruined!" she cried, and then she shut up and let him work. She looked down at him. He was pumping away furiously. He was finally paying attention to his own needs, exactly as she wanted him to. She watched his face. He was deep in concentration. He reached down and started to stroke his face. She reached down and started to stroke his face. She reached up and stroked his fin. He started to come. He smiled as he lost coordination. His hips pumped erratically. He pulled out his cock and shot his load on her belly, leaving dozens of little white droplets on her white coat. Then he collapsed into bed, exhausted. Twilight pulled him up and rested his head on her pillow. She slowly pressed kisses all over her face. Sometimes she kissed him on the lips and slid her tongue in quickly, but mostly she focused on his cheeks and temple. "Twilight?" He slowly opened his eyes. "What is it, Tiger?" she asked. "Can I ask something? Anything. Can I sleep with you tonight? I mean, in your bed?" It was still early. There was plenty to do before they would sleep. "Sure thing, hot stuff," she said. "And can I groom you again in the morning?" "Of course. We can do anything you'd like." "Anything? Really?" "Spike," she said, "I appreciate you every day of the year." Oh, looks like Spike's got some friendship with benefits here.